Major General John K. Singlaub was still a young airborne lieutenant when he accepted an offer from the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, to engage in hazardous duty behind enemy lines. As part of Operation Jedburgh, he parachuted into occupied France, where he worked to organize, train, and lead the French resistance. Once the Germans were driven from his area of operations, he volunteered for service in the Far East, fearing he might otherwise miss the remainder of the war. He was sent to China, where he trained guerrilla units to fight in Japanese-occupied Indochina. Near the war's end, he led a dangerous mission to rescue Allied POWs on Hainan Island, an operation that had to be executed quickly before the Japanese carried out their standing orders to execute all prisoners. The operations carried out by Singlaub and his fellow OSS Special Operations officers during World War II became the foundation of U.S. Special Forces, setting the stage for the unconventional warfare tactics that continue to define American special operations. Singlaub's path to war had begun years earlier. In 1937, he joined the junior ROTC program at Van Nuys High School before enlisting in the Army Reserves at age 17. From the beginning, he set his sights on becoming an infantry officer. He applied to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, but his congressman rejected his nomination, not because of his qualifications, but because of his family's political affiliation. The congressman's reasoning was blunt. "I can't do it for the son of a Democrat." Instead, Singlaub enrolled at UCLA, where he pursued a degree while training for his Reserve Officers Training Corps, ROTC commission. He studied French and Japanese, a decision that would later prove invaluable. In January 1943, he was commissioned as an officer and sent to parachute school. His assignment placed him in a parachute regiment at Fort Benning, but a chance encounter changed the course of his career. An OSS recruiter arrived at Fort Benning, searching for officers with specific skills. Anyone with language qualifications was asked if they were interested in joining a unit that specialized in hazardous missions behind enemy lines. At the time, Singlaub was away on a temporary duty assignment, but upon returning, he was approached by his adjutant. Singlaub was intrigued. He already considered paratrooper service hazardous, but OSS sounded even more dangerous. When he learned that the language they were interested in was his French, rather than his Japanese, he signed up immediately. Singlaub's orders directed him to report to the munitions building in Washington, D.C., a temporary structure dating back to World War I. Upon arrival, he was told to pack his gear and meet the next morning in a parking lot at Q Building. From there, he and other recruits were loaded onto a 2.5-ton truck, their view obscured by a tarp. When one of them asked where they were going, the driver responded, "The Congressional Country Club." At first, they thought the driver was joking, but the OSS had in fact taken over the country club for training purposes. There, recruits were psychologically assessed, tested under simulated combat stress, and placed in scenarios where instructors deliberately created problems to see how they would react. Some of these obstacles were caused by fellow trainees, who were in fact faculty members sent to observe and disrupt the group's operations. After a few days, the group was sent deeper into Maryland, where they trained at a location once known as Shangri-La, later called Camp David. Training there was far more intense. Their primary instructor for weapons training and hand-to-hand combat was Major William Fairbairn, a legendary British officer known for his brutal close-quarters combat techniques. Fairbairn had previously led the Shanghai Municipal Police and had developed a lethal fighting style based on real-world street brawls with criminal gangs. He had also designed the famous Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife used by British commandos. Under his instruction, Singlaub learned ruthless, efficient ways to neutralize enemies in close quarters. The training continued in Scotland, where OSS operatives trained alongside the British Special Operations Executive, SOE. The British were experts in unconventional warfare, having gained extensive experience running clandestine operations in their colonies. Much of the OSS's methodology was directly influenced by British tactics. From Scotland, training moved to southern England, where Operation Jedburgh teams were formed. These teams consisted of one English-speaking officer, either American or British, one officer from the occupied country, and one enlisted radio operator trained in covert communications. Singlaub's team included French officer Jacques de Penguilly and American radio operator Tony Deneau from Green Bay, Wisconsin. The three-man team bonded quickly, spending nearly all their time together, training each other in their respective specialties. On the night of August 11, 1944, Singlaub and his team boarded a Royal Air Force Sterling bomber, part of a special squadron assigned to drop Jedburgh teams behind German lines. Their mission was to train and equip the French resistance, disrupt German supply lines, and sabotage enemy positions ahead of advancing Allied forces. The aircraft rendezvoused with a bomber stream before executing a fake abort, turning back toward England to deceive German radar, before dropping to a low altitude and slipping beneath enemy detection. As they approached the drop zone, the resistance lit 3 fires in a row, a pre-arranged signal confirming a safe landing site. A 4th light flashed the Morse code letters for that night's drop, ensuring the team was landing in the right location. Singlaub's parachute deployed perfectly, and he landed near an SOE agent named Simon, who had been operating deep undercover in the area. Simon had already been gathering intelligence on local German forces and was in contact with French resistance leader Hubert. Hubert wasted no time moving the team off the drop zone, hiding them in a barn for the night. In the morning, the farmer's daughter brought them a fresh mushroom omelette, a rare luxury. The nearest German garrison was approximately 20 kilometers away, stationed in the town of Eggletons. The Germans had fortified a local school, using its reinforced concrete and elevated position to turn it into a fortress. The resistance was preparing to lay siege to the town, but things quickly spiraled out of control. Though the OSS and Army Secret Forces had planned a coordinated attack, the communist FTP faction launched the assault early, jeopardizing the mission. This was a serious problem. The Germans had access to anti-Maquis reinforcements in Clermont-Ferrand, about 50 kilometers away. As Singlaub surveyed the battlefield, he climbed into an attic for a better view. A moment later, a German anti-tank crew spotted movement and fired a round directly through the roof. Singlaub barely escaped, suffering a shrapnel wound to his right ear. Bleeding, he grabbed a Bren gun, flanked the enemy, and neutralized the anti-tank position himself. The Luftwaffe retaliated, bombing the town with Heinkel He-111S, dropping butterfly bombs that killed indiscriminately. The Germans soon withdrew, but Singlaub's war was far from over. With Eggletons cleared of Germans, Singlaub's Jedburgh team and their French resistance allies turned their attention to securing the region. Unlike other liberated areas, this part of France had been freed without direct Allied military intervention, a testament to the effectiveness of the resistance and their OSS SOE advisors. German forces, realizing their hold on France was slipping, began withdrawing their Atlantic Wall divisions back toward Germany. However, rather than retreating through resistance-controlled territory, they sought an alternate route further north, staying south of the Loire River to avoid ambushes. Seizing the opportunity, Singlaub requested permission from OSS London to lead mobile ambush teams against retreating German forces. With approval granted, his team, along with French Army Secret Forces, moved to set up ambushes along key retreat routes. The resistance operated using farm trucks fitted with charcoal burners. These vehicles were slow but functional, using heated charcoal to produce gas for fuel. Their strategy was straightforward: position troops along roads used by German columns, wait for an opening between German convoys and strike with small arms and demolitions before disappearing into the countryside. Singlaub studied the German convoy schedules, recognizing that their movements were highly methodical. By calculating the interval between convoys, his forces moved in the gaps, ensuring minimal exposure while maximizing damage. On one such mission, he partnered with French Jedburgh team leader Popeye Revez. During one of their drives through a German-occupied village, Singlaub, riding in the back seat, greeted passing French women with a cheerful "Hi Tootsie" in English. Jacques, his French officer, found this both hilarious and mortifying, later recalling that the Americans' casual bravado in occupied territory was both reckless and impressive. As the Germans continued their withdrawal, Singlaub's team expanded their reach beyond France, preparing an airstrip for clandestine supply and exfiltration missions. The field had been bombed into uselessness by the Germans, but his team, along with the resistance, cleared debris and repaired it for use by Allied aircraft. Their primary mission was to evacuate downed Allied airmen and ensure resistance-held areas remained impenetrable to German movement. As their work neared completion, Singlaub received new orders from London. His next assignment was not in France, but in Austria. OSS intelligence had confirmed a large number of escaped French forced labourers were hiding in the Austrian Alps. These men had fled German labour camps and were seeking refuge in the Tyrol Mountains. The new plan called for Jedburgh teams to parachute into Austria, make contact with these groups, and organize them into an armed resistance force. However, before the mission could proceed, French intelligence demanded control over French Jedburgh officers. Jacques de Ponguilly, Singlaub's trusted teammate, was ordered back to Paris to await further instructions. With bureaucracy slowing the mission, Singlaub began to suspect the war in Europe might end before he could deploy again. Rather than risk missing further action, he volunteered for duty in the Far East. His request was granted. He was given 30 days of leave in the United States, during which he married his fiancée before reporting to OSS headquarters in Washington for briefings on his new assignment. His next stop, China. Singlaub departed from the US aboard a troop ship, zigzagging for 35 days across the Pacific, stopping at Melbourne and Perth before arriving in Calcutta. From there, he took a train toward the Himalayas, heading for the American airbase at Dinjan. While waiting for a flight across the Himalayan hump into China, he volunteered to assist OSS Detachment 101 in Burma, which was relocating its headquarters to Pamo. Japanese stragglers and bandits still posed a threat along the Ledo Road, and he found himself once again scanning for ambush sites, only this time from the perspective of a potential target rather than an attacker. Once in Kunming, China, Singlaub was assigned to train a guerrilla unit of young Vietnamese fighters at Pose, a base near the China-French Indochina border. The objective was to disrupt Japanese control over Indochina, but Singlaub quickly found himself tangled in a political power struggle. The OSS had been working with Ho Chi Minh, believing him to be an anti-Japanese nationalist. However, Ho was determined to control all resistance activity in Vietnam, even in areas where he had little influence. He strongly opposed Singlaub's planned mission, arguing that the road and rail lines Singlaub was targeting were unimportant. Singlaub knew otherwise. Intelligence had confirmed that if the Japanese 21st Division needed to counter an Allied landing in China, it would move through the Lang Son corridor, the very route he was assigned to sabotage. However, with political delays mounting, the mission was postponed repeatedly. Then, in August 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Kunming immediately put Singlaub's mission on hold. Days later, with Nagasaki bombed and Japan on the brink of surrender, the operation was cancelled entirely. His new orders were even more urgent: rescue Allied POWs before they could be executed. Intercepted Japanese communications had confirmed that many Japanese commanders had received orders to execute Allied POWs before surrendering. OSS headquarters in Kunming ordered Singlaub to assemble a team and parachute onto Hainan Island, off the Chinese coast, to take control of a Japanese POW camp before such an atrocity could occur. His team consisted of 9 men, only 5 of whom had ever jumped before. His radio operator, Tony Deneau, remained by his side. He also recruited a Japanese interpreter, Lieutenant Ralph Yempuku, a medic and a Marine he knew would be useful in case of resistance. Upon arrival, the Japanese mistook the team's parachute drop as an attack. A squad of soldiers with fixed bayonets rushed toward them, while their supplies were destroyed by an improperly low drop. Despite the tense situation, Singlaub immediately took control of the encounter, refusing to acknowledge any officer below the rank of colonel. Using his Japanese interpreter, he ignored lower-ranking Japanese officers and demanded a meeting with the camp commandant. His strategy worked. The Japanese, recognizing his assertive demeanor and higher rank, agreed to cooperate. Once inside the camp, Singlaub assumed full control, personally taking charge of all transport, food, and medical resources for the 400 POWs still held on the island. They were starving and disease-ridden, with prisoners dying at a rapid rate due to deliberate malnutrition. He increased their rations to 5 small meals a day, stabilizing their condition. When the first Allied rescue plane arrived, its paratrooper medic dislocated his shoulder upon landing, adding yet another obstacle to the already dire situation. Singlaub's team secured the remaining POWs, evacuated them by train, despite guerrilla attacks on the rail line, and arranged for air and sea transport off the island. His final act on Hainan was ensuring that all remaining Allied prisoners and Chinese slave laborers were liberated. With their mission complete, Singlaub's team boarded an Australian destroyer for Hong Kong, arriving just in time to witness the official end of the war. That night, from the veranda of the Peninsula Hotel, they watched as the assembled fleet launched celebratory pyrotechnics, a rare moment of light and triumph after years in the shadows of war. Looking back, Singlaub believed in the original OSS philosophy of unconventional warfare, to train and empower indigenous forces to fight for their own liberation. He feared that modern U.S. special operations had become too focused on direct action, favoring lethal raids over long-term resistance building. For him, the lessons of the OSS remained clear. The best way to win from the shadows was to teach others how to fight their own battles. For more epic content, subscribe to The Shadows and the Past.